In Jorge Luis Borges' short story, The Theme of the Traitor and the Hero, we have several different layers of narrative going on. And at the top level, we have the narrator, who is perhaps Borges himself, and then he is talking about a researcher, Ryan, who is working out a puzzle, a historical puzzle that has to do with his great-grandfather, beautiful, heroic, young, murdered Fergus Kilpatrick, whose grave was mysteriously violated, whose name gives luster to Browning and Hugo's verses, and whose statue stands high upon a gray hilltop among red bogs. And the real action, besides what's going on with these two upper-level layers, you could say, to the narrative, is the strange historical account of the death of Kilpatrick, which turns out to actually have a solution to the mystery. So we've got three different levels going on here. And Borges begins by saying, under the notorious influence of Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton, inventor and embellisher of elegant mysteries, and the court counselor Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who invented pre-established harmony, in my spare evenings, I have conceived this plot, which I will perhaps commit to paper, but which already somehow justifies me. It needs details, rectifications, tinkerings. There are areas of the story that have never been revealed to me. I see it the following way. And it is set down on paper. So in a way, we've got kind of two different times being juxtaposed. Before I set it down, after I do set it down, but it's already set down. And in a way, this prefigures what's going to be happening in the story. We've got a reference to Leibniz and pre-established harmony, which is this doctrine that God created the best of all possible worlds. So every single detail has been arranged in advance, but there's still room for human freedom in Leibniz's scheme in ways that we won't go into here. And then G.K. Chesterton, a speculative fiction author who writes all sorts of interesting stories. Borges views himself as having a certain affinity with him. So what is the story? We've got this guy, Kilpatrick, who is a hero of the Irish Rebellion back in the early 19th century. So what we read is the action takes place in an oppressed yet stubborn country, or took place rather, for though the narrator is contemporary, the story told by him occurred in the mid or early 19th century, in 1824, let's say, for convenience's sake, in Ireland, let us also say. The narrator is a man named Ryan, the great-grandson of Fergus Kilpatrick, and we read all that. Kilpatrick was a conspirator and a secret and glorious captain of conspirators. So that is his job, that's his role. And we read that like Moses, who from the land of Moab glimpsed but could not reach the promised land, Kilpatrick perished on the eve of the victorious rebellion he'd planned for and dreamed of. The date of the first centenary of his death is approaching. The circumstances of the crime are enigmatic. Ryan, who's writing a biography of the hero, discovers the enigma goes deeper than mere detective work can fathom. And there's some interesting aspects to it. Kilpatrick is murdered in a theater. The English police never apprehended the assassin. And then he has a kind of ironic or sardonic thing here. Historians claim that this failure does not tarnish the good name of the police, since it's possible the police themselves had Kilpatrick murdered. Okay, passing on from that, where's the mystery? Well, Ryan is disturbed by certain things appearing almost cyclical, seeming to repeat or combine events from distant places, distant ages. Here's an example of it. Everyone knows the constables who examined the hero's body found a sealed letter warning Kilpatrick not to go to the theater that night. Julius Caesar, too, as he was walking towards a place where the knives of his friends awaited him, received a note he'd never read, a note telling him of his betrayal and revealing the names of his betrayers. So already we've got one sort of, isn't that odd that this person who dies with a sealed envelope containing, a warning is already like this historical character who is so centrally important to the development of, further events. There's a repetition, a similarity going on. There's another one. Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, saw in dreams a tower felled by orders of the Senate. On the eve of Kilpatrick's death, false and anonymous rumors of the burning of the circular tower of Kilgarvan spread throughout the country, an event that might be taken as an omen, since Kilpatrick had been born in Kilgarvan. And so we read these and other parallels between the story of Julius Caesar and the story of an Irish conspirator induce Ryan, the historian, to imagine some, and this is a wonderful phrase, secret shape of time, a pattern of repeating lines. Now, notice that Borges doesn't just say, well, he thinks that time is cyclical as opposed to linear, right? No, he expresses it a secret shape of time. And I like the fact that he brought up Leibniz, because one of the things that Leibniz tells us is that any sort of figure that you can think of could be mathematically expressed with the right equation. It's just a matter of finding it. So it doesn't have to be a circle, right? As we're so often accustomed to simplifying alternate theories of time. It could be all sorts of different shapes. A pattern of repeating lines. So not everything necessarily needs to repeat. So Ryan thinks of the decimal history conceived of by Condorcet morphologies, that is, forms or structures, proposed by Hegel, Spengler, and Vico. Mankind is posited by Hesiod degenerating from gold to iron. He thinks of the transmigration of souls. The idea that before Fergus Kilpatrick was that he was Julius Caesar. And then we read that he has a discovery, and this shifts him out of, as Borges is going to say, those circular labyrinths. Now, the labyrinth is one of Borges' favorite symbols to evoke. A labyrinth is a maze of sorts, right? There's an original labyrinth in Crete to house the Minotaur. Theseus is part of that story. Borges actually refers to that in a different story, the House of Aeran. So Ryan is saved from these circular labyrinths of his speculations of history by a discovery. But this discovery does not neatly solve everything. As Borges says, this will plunge him deep into other, yet more tangled and heterogeneous mazes. So tangled, more complicated, bound up on themselves. Heterogeneous. Isn't that an interesting word? Now, Borges does love that term. Is it just sort of thrown in there for local color? So heterogeneous means of different natures or of different origins. And this actually is doing some work in that sentence and the story. Because as we're going to learn very shortly, the maze that is created is a maze composed of human beings and their actions, but in a different way, coming from different origins. So he says, it seems certain words spoken by a beggar who spoke with Fergus Kilpatrick on the day of his death had been prefigured by Shakespeare in Macbeth. And this leads to the clue, right? The idea that history might have copied history is mind-boggling enough. So could it be that history does repeat it by whatever mechanism? Copying would be one of those. Yes, possibly. But history copying literature? Does that actually make sense? He says, that's inconceivable. Ryan digs further, and Ryan is going to find out something about Nolan, who is Kilpatrick's best friend, and also one of the people who's going to investigate who the traitor is. So James Alexander Nolan, the oldest of the hero's comrades, had translated Shakespeare's major plays into Gaelic, among them Julius Caesar. So he knows Shakespeare's plays inside and out. If you translate documents, you learn them very well. He also finds that Nolan has written about something else, the Swiss Festspiele. So what is Festspiele? So this is a German term. German is one of the languages of Switzerland. And a Festspiele, so fest, some sort of festival, some sort of party, and then Spiele, a game, but it can also mean a play, something that you're engaging in. And how are these described? Vast, peripatetic theatrical performances that require thousands of actors and retell historical episodes in the same cities, the same mountains in which they occurred. This is sort of like a reenactment, but a reenactment that's very well structured, right? And all of these people are participating in it. It is recreating history. So Nolan has not only translated these Shakespeare plays, he has also written an article on that festival, and this suggests what actually took place. The other clue, another unpublished document, reveals that a few days before the end, Kilpatrick, presiding over the last gathering of his chiefs, had signed the death sentence of a traitor whose name has been scratched out. And this seems incongruous. Why? Because Kilpatrick, customary mercifulness, doesn't get enacted in this. So Ryan investigates the matter and manages to decipher the enigma. The enigma is the mystery. That's actually the Greek word for riddle or puzzle, right? So Kilpatrick was murdered in a theater, but the entire city played the role of theater, and the actors were legion, and the play that was crowned by Kilpatrick's death took place over many days and many nights. It was, in fact, like an Irish version of the Festspiel, right? So what is the solution? Kilpatrick himself was the traitor who had to be executed. And we find, here's the theory. On August 2nd, the conspirators met. The country was ripe for rebellion. Something, however, always went awry. There must have been a traitor within the inner circle. Fergus Kilpatrick had given James Nolan the job of ferreting out the identity of this traitor, and Nolan had carried out his mission. Who was the traitor? Kilpatrick himself. He proved the truth of his accusation beyond the shadow of a doubt, and the men at the council that night condemned their leader to death. The leader signed his own death sentence, but he pleaded that his punishment not harm the cause. So why would it harm the cause? Kilpatrick is a beloved figure. To find out that the person who is the very leader of the rebellion has been betraying it over and over again would be demoralizing, would set the movement back probably many years. So what's the possibility? Nolan comes up with a vast drama that Kilpatrick will be part of and sacrifice his own life too. So Nolan doesn't have a lot of time to work, so he, like any good artist, draws upon the sources that he has available, and he plagiarizes. Plagiarizing is when you take somebody else's work and you present it as your own. In this case, he is plagiarizing passages, and you could call them plot points, from two plays, Macbeth and Julius Caesar. Why? Well, because they work, right? They're great plays. So he proposes that the condemned man die at the hands of an unknown assassin in deliberately dramatic circumstances. These would engrave themselves upon the popular imagination and not just preserve the movement, but hasten the rebellion. Kilpatrick collaborates in the plan, which gives him an occasion to redeem himself. So what does it actually look like? As we see, he plagiarized scenes from another playwright, the English enemy Will Shakespeare. The public yet secret performance occurred over several days. The condemned man entered Dublin, argued, worked, prayed, reprehended, spoke words of pathos. Each of these acts, destined to shine forth in glory, had been choreographed by Nolan. Hundreds of actors collaborated with the protagonist. The role of some was complex, the role of others a matter of moments on the stage. The things they did and said endure in Ireland's history books and in its impassioned memory, right? Kilpatrick himself more than once enriched his judge's text with improvised words and acts until a yearned-for bullet pierced the traitor hero's breast. Between two spurts of sudden blood, Kilpatrick could hardly pronounce the few words given him to speak. So it's a success, right? Kilpatrick, a traitor, becomes a hero because of this vast drama. Ryan now is posed not just with a mystery or an enigma or a labyrinth, but now that he's deciphered it, he's posed with a problem. Do I write about this? Do I report or speculate about what really happened? Or do I let the story in its official version stand as it is? Ryan actually suspects that the passages from Shakespeare were interpolated, placed in there, so that someone in the future would be able to stumble upon the truth. Ryan is that someone. Ryan realized he too is part of Nolan's plot. He has to decide, do I reveal what Nolan did or do I cover it back up? And we find out after long and stubborn deliberation, he decided to silence the discovery. He published a book dedicated to the hero's glory. That too perhaps had been foreseen. Now, of course, if he had only done that and we didn't have Borges telling us about Ryan, we wouldn't know that there was this entire story because it would be buried. So the third level, the highest level of Borges 20 years later, inventing this story about Ryan, who has investigated the story of Kilpatrick. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't have any story at all. But this is a very interesting and suggestive story about the nature of human history and its relationship to literary work and to the, let's call it the fabric that is woven out of narratives. Perhaps it has some application, more application today than it did at the time that Borges himself was writing it.